This is Urban Agriculture, episode number 18, recorded on September 16th, 2015. Hey, everybody, I'm Vincent Racaniello, and with me is Dickson Despommier.
Hello, Vincent.
How are you, Dickson?
I'm very well, thanks. And yourself?
I'm great. It's a nice day, isn't it?
It's perfect. It's one of those perfect days.
Sunny, no clouds. It's going to get into the 80s today.
And the humidity is low.
Yeah.
So it feels like a wonderful, still summer day.
Okay. So I think we should, with that background, introduce our guest.
We should.
Who is at Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
I'll be darned. Where
I spent a few years of my life.
See?
His name is Caleb Harper. Welcome to the show, Caleb.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Caleb.
What's your title there? Are you a research scientist?
I'm a principal investigator now. I got upgraded.
Principal investigator. Congratulations.
Yep. That's
Makes
great.
Me feel like Inspector Gadget or something. But
yeah.
And what department are you with?
So I'm in the MIT Media Lab, which is a crazy little microcosm of MIT that does awesome stuff.
Tell us more about that. That's a fascinating topic. But Vincent puts his hand up and says, but wait.
We want to hear first
a
little bit about Caleb.
Exactly.
Where are you from, Caleb?
I am from Texas.
Wow.
Texas. Yeah. So when the snow comes to Boston, I move very slow. So I'm kind of like a turtle or something, when it gets cold.
And where did you go to college?
So I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and I went to MIT.
And what did you major in?
Architecture and engineering, and actually a minor in sculpture. So I'm a weird person.
So do you still do sculpture?
Not so much anymore, but I have some ideas for some of the environments that we're building that might get me back into the installation game.
Nice.
So what led you to the MIT Media Lab? What was the path that brought you there?
Well, when there's a storm on the open ocean and the boat looks for a safe harbor, that was my grad school experience. So, in reality, I spent a few years out of school practicing architecture, and I was designing data centers and hospitals. So I became this specialist in control environments, both for computers and for people. And I came back to MIT to just explore, what else could I do with my strange skill set. And probably about halfway through, I found the Media Lab. And the Media Lab is a collection of, as the founder calls it, misfits, intellectual misfits. So there is no one department here. There is no pervading ideology for research. There is just the idea of if you have a good idea, you should try to build it. And then once you build it, you should try to get it into the world. So that was exciting for me. So I got here about the same time Fukushima happened, and they sent a group of us as kind of explorers and into Fukushima with the Japanese government to see if we collectively could add anything of value. And some of the people focused in right on radiation data, so they've been mapping for the last few years all of the radiation data coming from Fukushima through something they invented that's an iPhone Geiger counter. And another group was working on cities. So I went over with that group and hung out. And they were thinking, where are these, what's going to be rebuilt here? And what I was most affected by was seeing both the salt contamination. So obviously, a lot of their rice fields were salted. And it will take a long time for them to remediate. Yep. Japan already was importing 70% of its own food, and now anything that was still being grown was at that point they didn't know if it was tainted with nuclear contamination, but it's come out since that it's actually below international norm for nuclear contamination, but it's the fear and the perception of contamination that drove their rice markets just straight to the bottom. Nobody wanted to buy their rice. So I was out there in the middle of this, seeing the fields, seeing the farmers, and then hearing, that all of the youth had left to go to Sendai or Tokyo to do technology careers. And it just really impacted me, given my background, as my family's both in the grocery business and in agriculture. So I was like, okay, we need a new environment, check, number one, and we need something that engages young people's minds as part of producing food. So that's kind of where, I came into the Media Lab. I started building all of these weird things, from hacking things from Home Depot and Bed Bath & Beyond, and it's just taken off from there.
So as in the Media Lab, you're part of a larger Media Lab, and you have something called City Farm. Is that right?
Yeah. So actually, in the same way that I now am a principal, I also now have my own lab. So City Farm was a project of the City Science Initiative. And what's kind of happened now is we've transitioned out of that to our own space, which is pretty amazing. I'm really, really psyched about that. And we're calling it the Open Agriculture Initiative.
Nice.
And so City Farm will be one of the projects in the Open Agriculture Initiative. And we're, got a little space cooking here and got like 15 people working on different technology that's applied to control environment agriculture. And probably one of the bigger differentiators is everything that comes out of this group is open source. And I can talk about, why and how we're doing that.
So these 15 people, are they all associated in some way with MIT?
Well, because they've been hired by me.
But do you have students there, for example?
I do. So I have a few full-time people that have come out of my group with City Farm. So like people that have been in it from the beginning that have now come on full-time. Those are mechanical engineers, an embedded systems engineer, and a computer science engineer that have been in the project for a while. And then I also have students at the master's level and at the undergrad level. At the master's level, I'm teaching a course called Design to Manufacture with the School of Mechanical Engineering. And we're looking at, ways of designing control environment or vertical farming systems that are manufacturing friendly. And so I've got about, 10 students in that class. And then the rest of them are all undergraduates from, mechie to electrical engineers, computer scientists, some plant scientists, believe it or not, chemical engineers, school from the business school. I have 2 students from the Sloan School of Business. So it's really just running the gamut.
Nice.
Just before we started recording, you walked us through your lab, right, where you're growing plants indoors. Is that building located on the MIT campus?
It is. So it's right in the middle of the MIT Media Lab, right on the facade that kind of faces Boston.
I see.
And so in this lab, like I said, there are about 30 labs, and they range from synthetic neurobiology to biomechatronic design, new car design, new toy design. So things like Guitar Hero came out of the Media Lab, digital ink for Kindles, as well as some of the newest advancements in neurobiology and connecting the brain to artificial devices. So, you can't really describe everybody in any one way, but the cool thing is I think we're all just so anti-disciplinary that's what keeps us together. So yeah, I got the facade integrated lab is sitting right on a 3-story glass facade, and it's about the size of a shipping container, but it's built all clear. And now I've got these food computers everywhere, which are about the size of like 2 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. And I'm actually this week putting them into local Boston schools from 7th through 11th grade and getting them kind of in the hands of the students.
Can you tell us what that is, a food computer?
Oh, it's so cool. Okay, so the goal of it, to make like kind of a parallel reference. So about 10 years ago, a community of hackers got together and created something called the RepRap. And the RepRap, it wasn't called that then, but it is called that now. And the RepRap is an open source 3D printer. And basically, a bunch of people got together online and started sharing files and started sharing build files and tutorials and machine code and everything that they needed to create this kind of homebrew 3D printer. So now that community has matured and created commercial products have been created off of it, like MakerBot, like Formlabs, doing commercial 3D printing. So for us, this food computer is the agricultural analog to the 3D printer. And what it looks like is about 2 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot cube. And that cube is a control environment. And then to the left of that is about a 6-inch kind of cabinet, 6-inch deep cabinet that holds things like the microprocessor, the actuation systems, bottles that hold water for creating humidity, bottles that hold yeast for creating CO2, bottles that hold macronutrient and micronutrient formulas that are on controllable pumps, and all kinds of cool gadgetry that essentially is the brain of the food computer. So when, this first group of students that plays with this, when they remove a plant, they'll hit harvest on a game that we've designed for them on their iPad or on their phone. And when they hit harvest and they take a plant out, it will create a derivative plant recipe. And what that is a climate recipe that's been created while the plant is being grown. So to make it really simple, they pull out a basil, they hit harvest, and all of a sudden on their phone, they have a little program that says basil. And they can then email that program to another student at another school. They load it in to their game, and all of a sudden the little food computer goes into creating that climate.
So inside the box, you grow a plant. Am I getting this?
Yes.
and then you've got all
Vince
the conditions.
Is very visual, by the way.
And then you've got all the conditions you need to do that, which then you can send to someone else so they can reproduce it, right?
Right.
Yeah, you have a digital history of, like, for example, there's a humidity sensor in the box. There's a CO2 sensor in the box. There are electrical conductivity sensors, light intensity and spectrum sensors. There's a whole suite of sensors that are just running all the time collecting data. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing that, I stumbled into is kind of the study of the phenome and the phenotypic traits and responses of plants related to environmental stimulus. So different environment, we know this already, but different environment creates different plant-based expression. So if you change parameter like more CO2, it's likely to change an expression of that plant to maybe a different flavor, maybe slightly different coloration, maybe different nutrient density or nutrient expression. So it's really important that they have this kind of layered collection of data points that they can make executable again, so that they can do whatever they did again. And hopefully over time, it'll just get better and better.
So Caleb, how many different species of edible plants are they playing with right now?
Right now, there are 6 plant sites, and you can imagine that the box is pretty small. So we're starting with them with culinary herbs and leafy greens.
Okay.
Mainly because they're really easy to grow.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's kind of where vertical farming in the United States picks up, is things that are easy to grow, that don't take much energy, and are mostly made of water. Yeah. So unfortunately, right now we won't be producing a lot of nutrition, but we will be producing a lot of curiosity and engagement, because those leafy greens and herbs grow in roughly 3-week cycles from seed.
Right.
So they can get a few crop cycles in one semester.
Sure.
Which, normally for kids growing plants, it's like watching paint dry.
Yeah.
It's a little too slow for the hyperactive mind of a 7th grader.
Yeah.
So this gives them a bit more speed and consistency for the whole school year.
So what might be a great addition sometime in the near future is to put a time-lapse photograph capacity
We're already
inside.
on top of it, Dickson. We're already on top of it.
Excellent.
Every day, what we call a GIF gets uploaded to a little screen on the front of the food computer, and I can send you a picture so that everybody can see it.
Yeah, we'd like that. So eventually,
it's in Popular Science magazine this month.
Are you envisioning a national network of cubes that handle a wide variety of plants. So eventually there'll be a national database for scale-up projects that want to grow this, and that. They'll just go to this database and they can upload it, and these are the conditions under which they grow the best, and the next thing you know, you've got a vertical farm.
That's exactly right. When people are talking about scale and vertical farming right now, and they see this little one, or they see the shipping container size ones, or they see the factory size ones, they're looking for technology that scales. And now, having built all three of those, very little technology scales between the three implementations. What scales perfectly is climate. Climate is the thing that, how you make that climate at 10,000 square feet versus 4 square feet is very different.
I'll say.
But that recipe, that digital recipe that encompasses the entire phenome that plant has been exposed to, that's the thing that scales.
Here.
So you can imagine 10,000 of these little bots scattered around, and they're basically producing data. And that data is being uploaded to a wiki.
Right.
And people could vote on it. They could say, oh, it tasted good, thumbs up.
Right.
It could have associated nutrient density data that someone else has collected. It could have all kinds of correlative data that then says this is a good recipe or a bad recipe.
Right.
And so for the operator, they just have to load the recipes.
Yep.
Whereas right now, every operator is both an R&D facility, an experimental R&D facility at that, and producing all of this biological complexity that really makes it hard for them to be profitable.
So what about a home unit based on the cube that's big enough to supply produce? Let's say 10% of what you buy you could actually grow yourself now with a homegrown unit that operates on the same level.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the goals. I try to be really realistic and say that, like, 4 square feet, for example, if you reference something like square foot gardening, which is a nice metric for those of us doing this kind of work, you might have 4 to 6 heads of lettuce in that 4 square feet.
Sure.
And those lettuce may come out in 15 days.
Right.
So that's not a whole lot of food in one unit. Now, I do imagine people that are really into this adding more units.
Yep.
It's just like, how much of your house would you give up to get what you want?
Sure.
But in the future, I have this really interesting collaboration starting with the Center for the Microbiome here at MIT, which is one of the newest centers. And with what we're learning about the microbiota and the bacteria that makes us healthy, I do have the idea that eventually you might have this bot in your house, and it might grow something that's very, very specific to you, and you might actually get prescribed the bacteria that you need, and it be passed through the food, because the food's just a sensor. I mean, it's a sensor for nutrition, it's a delivery mechanism for the microbacteria and organisms. So I think that might be something where it makes a huge difference to the individual person. But mostly right now, these bots for me are about creating capacity and creating, just the ability to interact.
Right.
Because, growing food is really hard. And if you've ever tried to grow a plant in your house, you know that growing a plant is not very easy.
Yeah.
So growing food consistently is even harder. So I just think of the little bot as a tool. It's like a personal computer was in the 70s or the 80s when they were like, oh, we don't really know what it's good for exactly, but it's super awesome.
Here.
And all of a sudden, lots of people use it as a tool of self-expression. That's what I hope happens with the bot.
Got it.
So, Dickson, you're talking about people sharing their grow information, but, you and I have visited a few vertical farms or indoor farms. They're pretty secretive about it.
They're proprietary.
So how do you think that's going to work?
So there's one group out in Den Bosch in Holland, or the Netherlands, I should have said, called Plant Lab, that basically has done all of this, according to them at least, for 40 crops.
Mm-hmm.
They have a matrix that's got about 9 boxes by 9 boxes, and each box is a unique combination of all the things that Caleb has just told us about. And they showed me some pictures of kale. The same species of plant was planted in every box, and every box had a different shape and a different size kale in it. So they said it depends on what you want as a grower as to what the formula is that we can recommend to you. But I think the disadvantage of being plant lab is that they want to control the flow of knowledge. So they want to actually run the vertical farm, and they want to charge for the use of their formula because they paid a lot of money to get them to begin with, right? They did the research and development. But Caleb's approach is totally different. It's like looking at PLOS for publications. You know, they're open to the public. People can submit to them. It's peer-reviewed, but it's not charged. The page charges are not there or anything else. So this is an open-source vertical farm potential.
Well, I think that you're basically saying it's like software. There's open source software, and then there's closed source, and this is going to be the same. There's going to be both, right?
Here. So,
well, and what people don't realize is open source software runs the world. Linux is the kernel for everybody.
Yeah.
So when everybody thinks, oh, open source is some kind of good thing for the public, but I mean, come on, let's face it, Apple and Microsoft are killing it. Apple and Microsoft were built off of Linux. So, you know, Google, everybody, if you look up who supports Linux, it's every major tech company, because they needed a core development that they could then build things off of. So when you think of Plant Lab and the difference between what I'm doing and what they're doing, frankly, they're probably way better plant scientists. I'm just going to put that out there. The Dutch, you know, they've got that under control.
They do.
But I'm going to be crowdsourcing the same information that they're able to get only by the machines that they have.
Yeah.
And they're looking for perfect recipes.
Yep.
And frankly, there's never going to be such a thing, because it depends on culture, it depends on market, it depends on changing values. You know, there's a whole social component to these recipes that's not being considered. It's only saying things like, what's the shortest amount of grow time? What's the perfect looking plant for the way that people want them right now? You know, so, you know, the value of patenting a recipe, we want to ask the question societally, do we want the existence of climate patents? And that seems, you know, a little crazy to me. So if we don't want climate patents, then we have to do something else.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about the philosophy of the Media Lab, because I had the privilege of visiting your facility and giving a talk there, and you explained very carefully how the support system for everybody's contribution to the Media Lab, how that worked. And I think our listening audience would be enthralled to hear how that actually comes out.
So one really important thing is to look at, you know, when you look at an organization, look at the leaders, right?
Right.
And so, you know, founded by Nicholas Negroponte, who's the founder of something called One Laptop Per Child, for example, where he built a big consortia to create influence, to create a lot of cheaper laptops to get them in the hands of children all around the world.
Right.
The current director is a guy named Joey Ito, and Joey's the founder of Creative Commons, which is part of the copyleft movement. So, you know, he's put himself out there to create open source music, open source images.
Yeah.
And now when you go onto Google, you can do an image search, and then you can set a parameter that says for what rights of use. That's based on what Joey and a lot of his collaborators created. So that blood runs deep of creating scientific advancement and sharing that with a lot of people. And hitting that network, being able to hit that network is really valuable for us here. And Joey's also one of the creators of Kickstarter, angel investor and/or founder, I can't remember, of Kickstarter. So that idea of micro entrepreneur, you know, also lives in the Media Lab.
Sure.
So the way that we're all funded, which is what everybody wants to know, where do you guys get money? You seem like, you know, you're not responsible to anybody. You know, it's a bunch of crazy, you know, people doing awesome things, but it doesn't feel like academia. And parts of that are true. You know, our funding model is very, very different. So we have a corporate consortia funding model where we have about 80 member companies, and those companies put in a yearly fee to have access to royalty-free shared IP. And what's very different about that is every company that joins has shared access to anything that comes out of the lab, as do I, as the researcher. I can use my own IP, and no one can make it proprietary to one company. So that's a very, very different model than most every other academic institution out there, or research institution. So what's great is companies are members of the Media Lab, like Google, like Microsoft, that bring in the ideas from, the problems that they're faced with, and then we take some of those ideas forward and invent with that as a kind of a primer. So different groups in the lab, I would say, have different focus. Like, there's a group here that is working on creating the next generation prosthetic, and it's called Biomechatronic Group. And if you see the TED Talk by Hugh Hare, it's amazing. And so they're very focused on that. There are other groups in here that are just interested in creating the future. And that's a very nebulous idea, but they create very cool stuff, and they're not bound to some kind of research contract or proprietary IP. They're totally free to invent and explore at will. So it's in that kind of environment that this project has been fostered. And I think it took some of that institutional environment to make it possible to say, hey, you know what? Money, because of course, money's been invested on MIT's part to create what I'm doing through me. And to be able to say, hey, you know what? Your money is now open source, and we're going to share it with everyone. That takes a different institutional mindset, and it takes a different priority than most places have.
Right.
So, Caleb, you showed us a floor with plants growing inside. Is that a laboratory? And if so, how do you decide what experiments to do?
So the one that I showed you on the facade, I guess we could call it a lab. I mean, we called it the City Farm, and we still probably will. It is an enclosed space that has an0atmospheric control, so that I can do things like raise the CO2 level or raise the humidity or change the temperature. As an aside, I've already copied that lab in Guadalajara, Mexico, and you'll probably find some information about that online. So we have our first total replicant operating thousands and thousands of miles away. I have a Fulbright scholar in my lab from Guadalajara now. That's a connection down there, and it's going off like crazy. It's so great. But how I choose experiments, I was actually just off a conversation right before this with Seed Savers Exchange, and we're creating a collaboration. And they said, well, how do you choose your seed? How do you choose what you grow?
Right.
And I said, well, there's two ways. One is what's awesome. So, part of the work, if you think of what I'm trying to accomplish, I'm trying to be the builder of essentially computers, biologic computers. So the biologic output is important for me, but I'm not biased. I'm somewhat agnostic when it comes to what I'm growing. And so the way I make that decision is I like to create engagement. So people in the Media Lab come into the farm and harvest the food, and then they eat it, and we have harvest celebration. And then I also take a portion of it to different homeless shelters in Boston. And one of those homeless shelters teaches a culinary class. So what's interesting for them to have as a culinary product to experiment with is what I grow. So that's part of my lab, is just literally for growing things that people like to eat, surprising things that they didn't expect were possible inside, and creating that kind of curiosity. And at the same time, while I'm growing those plants, I'm of course recording all of that data. So it's creating the bank for me, and it's also kind of spreading the project.
How do you share that data that you generate with whoever would like to use it?
That's a really great question. So we're right pre-launch right now. We're very close to launching all of the hardware specs and software and data sets for the personal food computers first, as part of that learning network. And so it'll be hosted on openag.mit.edu. We're just a little bit prior to the launch right now, but that's where you'll get it.
I'm happy to put that on the show notes when we finish.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully the site's up by that point. We're in the middle of a lot of things right now. The other way that we choose things that we're growing is based on sponsor interest. But what's really great is all of the sponsors for my work know that my project is open source. So it's a different it's even a different animal inside of the Media Lab. So anyone that's chosen to engage with me has championed the idea that the research that they're paying for would also be open. So one of those crop choices we've made is cotton. So I'm actually growing cotton in the Media Lab right now. The reason for that is cotton is an environmentally intense crop.
True.
And the changing climate patterns for this company that's based in India have really affected the quality and the consistency of cotton. So I would say that choice for them, and it's many other big companies have the same choice to make, which is where are they getting their raw ingredient for whatever they make, and what is the environmental cost of that raw ingredient. So this company has stepped forward and said, look, we manufacture 60 to 70% of the sheets and towels for the United States. I mean, this is a huge company. Wow. So they can afford to be 10 to 20 years out ahead of their competitors in what they call non-competitive research. So this is non-competitive research where we're taking cotton, we're growing it in aeroponics and hydroponics, we're looking at the expressions of the fiber, like is it stronger than conventional, is it more uniform, does it have an inherent pigment that conventional doesn't have, and starting to create capacity to grow cotton. So that's another way we choose. And then the last way is when we get offered free stuff. So
swag,
like not just swag, but analysis. So like we aren't a chemical engineering lab at our heart. We are not a molecular biology lab at our heart.
Yeah.
But we need analysis like plant tissue analysis.
Oh, sure.
We need olfactory analysis. We need chemical and nutrient density analysis. So we have had partners like a group called Partners in Food Solution, which is a consortium of General Mills, Unilever, and Cargill that operate in Africa to set up mills to increase productivity of African food crops. They've offered to do analysis with us. So anything that we send them, they do analysis and they make that analysis open.
Cool.
So we've picked crops based on that because we want to know, hey, this hybrid broccoli seed, when it's in the ground, what's the analysis of it? When it's in the hothouse or the greenhouse, what's the analysis of it?
Right.
And when it's in control environment agriculture, what's the analysis of it? And what's different?
Yeah.
These are just questions that nobody has the answer to.
Yeah. Something just lit up in my mind as you were talking about cotton. I ran across this reference somewhere on the internet. Of course, I forget where. But cotton apparently has been genetically engineered so that the cotton balls come out different colors.
Mm-hmm.
So that you don't have to use these toxic dyes anymore to make a certain colored sheet or a cotton cloth. It's already colored.
There's two things in the world of cotton that I think, now that I've launched into the world of cotton, I went down to Memphis and I got taught things at the USDA classing office. I walked the cotton fields. I've been in India walking cotton fields, and I've learned two amazing things.
Yeah.
One is 98% of cotton is biotechnology enhanced cotton.
Yes.
So even finding a hybrid variety is very rare.
Sure.
But I did find hybrid varieties. They're very good.
Uh-huh.
The next two advancements in cotton, what you're talking about is inherent pigment.
Yeah.
Inherent pigment reduces the amount of bleaching and the amount of chemical dyeing, which is two of the most environmentally destructive things that cotton production does.
Sure, of course.
The other thing that's super cool is there's now a variety of cotton that's been bred. I believe it's at Texas A&M that has edible cotton seed, not just pressable. You can press cotton seed now and get cotton seed oil, but this is purely edible and it contains a lot of protein.
Cool.
So right now, when they process cotton, the seed that comes out they usually use for animal feed.
Right.
But this could now become a human edible product. So I think those two things are really standing at the forefront of cotton, and we're excited to be kind of doing a little tiny part of it.
So people in Texas must just love you. I mean, you're a transplanted Texan to begin with, and here you are helping their industry survive through what I guess most people would call a climactic a tragedy because
there's hardly any cotton left in Texas.
Exactly. But they used to grow a lot of it.
Yeah, they did for sure. And, this is the macro case of climates are changing and we're chasing them.
Right.
And my fundamental question is, what if climate was autonomous?
Right.
Like, what if climate didn't move?
Exactly.
What would be possible?
Yeah.
So with stationary climate comes a whole different idea of agriculture.
That's
I mean,
right.
it's really fundamentally different because 365 days of consistent climate
Here.
does not exist anywhere on the earth. So if it did, what would change? And that's one of the things I'm most excited to see.
Let's write that book.
Exactly. Well, it's that, and then it's, how do we email the tomato?
Right.
And we've already figured it out. We're emailing
How do you 3D
plants.
print a real tomato?
Well, we're emailing digital climate recipes to bots right now that create tomatoes.
Sure.
And that's just the low-hanging technology that we can do right now.
No pun intended, of course.
Exactly. My life is full of puns now.
Because, tomatoes are fruits, so that would be good to use in that sense anyway.
Yeah.
So what couldn't you grow inside, in your opinion?
After so I went to this really crazy conference where they brought together most of the scientists from across the world that are doing this. And after seeing what everybody's doing, from China to Japan to South Korea to the Netherlands to Central and South America to the folks in the U.S., I actually don't think there's anything you can't grow in these. Now, there's surely an economic limit, and we'll find those economic limits. But what people need to understand is, there's this really interesting thing, I'm sure Dickson's seen it, called Caliber Biotherapeutics.
I was in the building. I was actually filmed in that building.
So I was talking to their grower and loved the guy. Awesome.
In Texas.
Yeah, in Texas, of course. Yeehaw for that. But, when I learned that they were growing essentially the natural substrate for the proteins that create antibiotics, and specifically the Ebola vaccine, and that won DARPA's grand challenge, that's amazing. And that's a story that isn't well told. But these are acre-big facilities producing vaccines for the world off of plants using something similar to tobacco mosaic virus.
So we've actually featured that on TWIV. We have another podcast called TWIV. We've talked about this.
Sweet.
So, but that's a narrow audience. You're absolutely right. This needs to go to the United Nations.
It totally, and the interesting thing was when I was talking to their grower at this conference, he said, you know what you're doing is what we all need, but no one will do. And that goes to your earlier point of we're proprietizing everything because the current feeling in vertical farming is that there's a gold rush afoot. Yeah. And that we're going to create machines that spit out food, and we're not going to tell anybody how they work, but they're going to be efficient, and we're going to be able to sell produce out of them.
Right.
I'll make a bold prediction that over this year, we will lose 2 out of the 4 major players in vertical farming in the United States. I can see that coming. And the reason that it's coming is that no one's sharing technology, no one's sharing expertise.
Sure.
That just doesn't... Look at how the internet was built. The internet was built by users. It was user-driven development.
Sure.
So when you have no user-driven development, you better have a hell of a team that's full of biologists, molecular biologists, plant physiologists, electrical engineers. There's no company that could support that. Yeah. This is an entire ecosystem that you're designing. And so we need to encourage these companies that they could still make money and actually make more money if they were sharing things.
Yep.
And I think you'll see the leaders in that industry start to say the same thing.
Sure.
Well, that's why I mentioned before that some of these farms we've gone to are so secretive. They don't want to tell us anything. They didn't even want us to take pictures.
Of course. And I don't, I am a friend to those guys. It seems like I'm a foe, but I feel like a friend.
Sure.
Because I'm saying, I know you have problems, and I want to help you solve them, but you're not going to solve them by keeping your hands closed.
It's a plant psychiatrist.
Yeah, you're just not going. It's too big. Food is too big.
You're right.
To think that you're going to create a little machine that nobody. Frankly, what do we think the consumer is going to say when you say, "Hey, all of this food came out of a warehouse with no soil and no light"?
Right.
Don't we need a better story than that?
Yeah.
And that's what Dickson inspires in everybody is telling the story, saying how it's going to happen, so that people can wrap their head around it.
We're only telling it through your mouth, by the way. So without you guys, I would have been shut up a long time ago. So really, you're walking the walk, but I'll talk the talk. So you guys keep working, and I'll keep talking.
Yeah.
By the way, Caleb, just to interject here, I agree with your long-term analysis, but in the short term, I only know one company so far that's gone out of business, and that's Valcent, and that was for a very particular reason, because they were located in Vancouver, and they wanted to actually move their operations to the state of Washington because growing pot was legal in Washington, okay?
Right.
So they just left their facility in Vancouver.
You're talking about the verticrop system.
Yeah, the verticrop system. It was a burden. It's a burden on that city's economy. They have to try to either get somebody else to use it, which is difficult. Because
Dixon, did you see that the USDA licensed the verticrop system?
I did not see that.
Just a couple weeks ago.
Really? That's amazing. But the other companies that I know of, I don't know one that isn't expanding.
Well,
so yeah, Greensense Farms, for instance. Greensense Farms just got a contract for 20 similar factories, if you want to call them that, or vertical farms in China.
Okay, well, there you go. It's not in the United States.
No, it's not in the United States. That's true. But New Spirit Farms probably they've got some legal problems to deal with, I understand.
Yeah.
But Farmed Here is expanding, I understand.
Well, you've got Aero Farms. That's a big question.
Yeah, we've been there. That's the company that didn't want to show us the formula for their plants, but they did show us the way in which they grew them, which was, I thought, remarkably different than all the other indoor growing systems that we saw. They plant lawns of greens.
Yeah, I got to tell you, their scientist Ed Harwood.
I like him a lot.
He is awesome.
He's the best.
For everything that we could say about anybody that's keeping super secretive. Ed is a real,
right,
salt of the earth scientist.
That's right.
That I just love spending time with.
And he's a former dairy farmer.
Yeah, dairy automation.
So he's big on that stuff. So I can imagine vertical farms that grow food for cattle. I've already seen a video on this, by the way, in the former Yugoslavia. There's a farmer there that had a big warehouse that he was growing oats and I forget the other crop that he was growing, but whatever he grew, it matured in about 4 weeks, and he had this as a continuous growing system, so that every day out from the barn came this very tasty meal for 200 dairy cattle, and they crowded around the door every morning like Pavlovian dogs to wait for that day's food, because not only was it fresh, it tasted good too. It wasn't like fermented hay or something.
Don't get me wrong that I have pessimism towards it. What I have is a reality that says,
sure.
In the United States, we're competing on margin. Obviously, when you go into China, I mean, look at Japan.
Or Japan. No, Japan's the best example. You're right. Absolutely right.
Japan is heavily subsidized by the national government.
Yeah, but so is outdoor farming here, so that if we don't have an equal playing field to start off with, then, somebody's going to win that shouldn't, and somebody's going to lose that shouldn't.
Well, and it's totally true. And so I'm looking at these guys competing on margin. I'm seeing in the product categories they're competing in.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the energy analysis that I've done saying, can they compete?
Right.
And it's a huge question. And I think if they were more open, there would be more minds
You're quite right. And I think,
solutions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep wanting to jump in here because it's such an exciting topic. I think Lumatex, and we've had them on the show too, wants to facilitate a sharing of at least the energy portion of getting light to plants. And there should be other companies like that around here too. But your facility sets the gold standard for how to do it.
Well, and I can't
source.
overclaim anything. We're behind on a lot of things, but I think that we'll grow really fast because it's the age of the networked economy. We need to face that.
That's true.
Holding proprietary secrets for the way that you make things is an industrial tactic. And it's not going to continue. Those companies making tons of money. Look at Tesla. Why has Tesla gone open source?
Right.
Now it's questionably open source for sure. But why has it gone open source? It's gone open source because it needs more charging stations, so it needs more companies that understand its technology.
That's true.
This is how the world is going to work. It's not going to work through designing a Tesla as a precious, special thing and not having an ecosystem around it.
Yeah, so I understand that they've now partnered with BMW, which is an interesting partner because BMW doesn't make electric cars yet, but they will soon.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, think of the markets we've got now. Like Amazon just announced Amazon Restaurants.
Right.
That's pretty crazy.
Amazon Restaurants, that's right.
We've had Amazon Fresh for a while. They've been working through supply chain problems. And then, as I said, like when we were together at AgCon a couple of years ago, I was like, I had just been told that Amazon and Uber made a partnership, and now that's become public.
Right.
Like we've got a clickable interface for food, and we've got crowdsourced driving. And food delivery.
And you want to talk about warehouses? Nobody has more warehouses than Amazon, so they can take half of that warehouse and convert it to vertical farming.
Exactly. So I think, everybody right now, and I get it, if I was in the business of trying to raise venture capital for a control environment ag facility, I'd have to do the exact same thing. So I don't begrudge them at all. You would have to file patents to show the venture capitalist that you have something worth investing in.
That's true.
But there's got to be a more impactful model. And, luckily I sit in a place where they say, hey, go for it.
Exactly. I mean, you've got angel investors that don't care about the profit margin so much as they care about getting the information out. And so
it's all about the impact.
And that's remarkable. I think that we need more people like that to support the growth of this industry. And once it's out there, I think that you're absolutely right. It's not how you grow your food, it's how you micromanage the standard technologies to make your food better than the next one, but it's not a secret.
Well, and the interesting thing is now I'm seeing a shift because, like I said, Joey being a founding part of Kickstarter and a lot of other things, there's a lot of venture capitalists that come through the lab, right?
Sure.
And on the corporate side, as much as on the individual side. And there are a lot of them playing in food right now. Awesome. I mean, they're learning as they go, but I think a lot of them are learning. They went into food thinking traditional venture capital.
Yeah, right.
And they're learning now that that's not exactly the way that the food industry works. And it seems like there's a fair number that went into it with the genuine intention to make a better world. And so now there's all kinds of alternative kind of funding that you're starting to see either come through philanthropic funding or come through more patient capital from venture capitalists that have a time horizon that is not 3 years, that is not 5 years, that's into 10 and 20 years.
That's right.
So you look to somebody like, who's funding new food companies now? Horizon Ventures. Horizon Ventures, backed by Li Ka-shing, they're looking at technology that's not going to be ready for 10 to 20 years.
How about that?
Schmidt family's investing in this space, and they're also a very patient source of capital. So they are out there. So taking the first, $3 million that's offered to you by a typical VC fund is not necessarily the best place for our generation of entrepreneurs that want to do farming.
Sure. So I guess Goldman Sachs invested in AeroFarms based on their presentations to them, and they showed how intense the farming is and what the yields are and what the turnover rates are and what the profitability is. And all of those were based on their proprietary knowledge of that little cloth that they grow everything on. So that's an unusual exception to this rule, I think. You're absolutely right about the rest of it.
But how, I think that is, Goldman Sachs, even looking deeper into what did they actually invest in.
Right.
Like, I don't know this, but I've been told that it was more in the real estate than it was in the company.
No doubt about it. I think it's Rejuvenate Newark.
Yeah. And so there's just a lot of smoke and mirrors going on.
That's right.
And I get it. And like I said, if I was doing that, I would probably have to do the same thing. I would claim that everything I did was the solution to the world food crisis all the time, probably. And I would say that I'm the only one that understands it.
So, okay.
But frankly, it's biology, man.
Of course it is.
So, if I see other trends in the Media Lab as well. And in a place that's typically known for computers and artificial intelligence, there are now 6 groups doing biology, and we have 2 new wet labs in the Media Lab.
Wow.
So I'm seeing this shift from pervasive computing to pervasive biology.
Here.
And it's a lot of the same technologists that are now working with natural things.
Got it.
And, doing things like bacteria-based computing. That world of biology has hit tech, and I don't think it's going to stop for a long time. And I think it might actually, if we came back 10 years in the Media Lab, we might have half of us doing something.
Well, that was my question to you. put yourself 10 years down the road. You're still a full member of the Media Lab. What are you doing?
Oh gosh, if they kept me for that long, remember I'm an insurgent. But if I'm still here, what am I doing in 10 years?
Yeah.
Well, I'm running data centers as research that are producing what I'm hoping becomes the Open Phenome Project. George Church is a professor at the Media Lab and at the Wyss Institute. And George is the father of human genome, right? And I see the potential to do an open phenome and say, okay, we've got data centers running. And what I mean by data centers are control environments for biologic processes that are computer driven and are collecting data intensely, and just mapping all of the potentials for plant-based expression that exist relative to environmental cause. The genome knowledge is expanding so fast. One of my formal advisors to my lab is a guy named Howard Shapiro, who's really famous for open sourcing the genome of cacao and the genome of peanuts. He's now working on 101 open genomes for African orphan crops. And his goal with that is to bring them back into production in Africa because some of them have higher nutrient density. We need a whole earth catalog. We need to go Buckminster Fuller on this thing. And say, okay, we've got all these plants. We've now got the ability to collect a lot of great data and understand them in a way that wasn't possible before, create correlative data structures that will teach us so much that we need a full-on Wikipedia of every plant that we've got and what it can do. And I'm imagining that once we have that, we might also work backwards and say, holy cow, actually kale under these climate conditions produces a nutrient density that we've never seen before. And those climate conditions are in an area that has never grown kale. And because we never thought about it that way. We never prospected climate.
Right.
So if what I can be contributing to falls in the category of food democratization or climate democracy, I think that would be amazing.
Sure.
Because the narrative on climate is like we're all screwed. Climate's changing, we're all in trouble, and there's no water, and there's no this, and there's no that. But what if climate was a tool that was scalable? And what if we were collecting that in 10 years, and we were using it to humanity's benefit?
Sure. So every state in the United States has mandated an IT school and an ag school. And you're sitting in the seat of one of the world's greatest IT schools. So Caltech, MIT, NJIT, I would throw that in the mix.
Stevens.
That's where his son goes, by the way. So that's a state, that's not a state university. And then you've got an ag school, and your ag school is at the University of Massachusetts.
Yep.
So what if your initiative could expand to set up collaborations for urban agriculture with the IT school and the ag school for every single state in the United States?
We're already doing it, Dickson.
You're already doing it.
We have the collaboration with MSU,
okay,
a traditional ag school, and a professor named Eric Runkle. And Eric does LED plant physiology research, and he's one of the tops.
Nice.
He's the next generation under kind of Carey and Mitchell and the Purdue folks.
Right.
And there's a few of them. So that's the whole point is what if I'm building is a computer, and what if that computer is used by Davis, by Texas A&M, by K-State, by Purdue to do what they're good at, so that I'm not trying to do what they're good at, because I will never be able to do it as good as them.
So is there a meeting that you could go to or that we could go to present this future to the Ag School, IT School Forum to allow...
I presented it personally to Tom Vilsack.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I'm meeting, following up with NIFA and what's the other one? Agricultural Extension Office.
Oh, yeah.
Because they need agricultural extension for vertical farming.
Of course they do.
And so, now you see USDA moving to license
Yep.
And I don't know. There's so much politics in that. I don't even begin to understand.
Yeah, the food politics are incredible, aren't they?
Why they license verticrop, I don't know. But it shows that they're being proactive in the space.
Not bad.
Whether they're doing it the right way, wrong way, I don't really care. I like that they're paying attention to it.
Yeah, that's true.
So when I proposed that and I said, hey, this is new FFA, Future Farmers of America. This is new 4-H.
This is true.
For a whole different kind of kid.
That's right.
And they really like that idea. So I think it's right up there.
Yeah. 4-H's is hydroponics, horticulture, hot houses, and heroes. Everybody becomes a hero.
We're going to have to watch them for what they try to grow. I mean, they are in high school. But I think I am, learning a lot about the reason I'm doing what I do is I just think it's awesome and fun. And when I was really just disillusioned with architecture, I always wanted to go back to the farm. I always wanted to watch something grow. I was like, screw this place. I'm going home. I'm going to watch corn grow, and that's all I'm going to do. And I feel like a lot of people have that in today's kind of constantly activated society.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm doing it. But I realize what I'm doing is potentially the biggest impact of what I'm doing is not solving a problem. I don't claim that I'm going to solve any problems, but I do hope to create more farmers. So if they have a technology that they can play with, a platform, something to learn on, something that curriculum can be developed on, and then they have staged, up to the middle stage and up to the big stage,
sure,
there will be a whole new generation of problem solvers that can be created off of technology like this.
True.
So I had to I'll share one more thing about that. I had a meeting with Kofi Annan Foundation in Agra, and they shared something with me that I thought was a different way of looking at the problem. And they said Africa is 50% of the population is under 18.
Right.
And 80% of them do not want to be farmers.
Exactly.
They've seen their life, the hard life of their parents being farmers, and they want to go to the cities and they want to do something that's relevant to today's technology.
Yep.
And they said, what does it mean for a continent full of 1-acre farms to 5-acre farms, right? Because Africa hasn't gone the way of the United States in terms of consolidation. Nope. It's based on tribal land inheritance.
That's true.
So what does it mean for an entire continent full of very small plot farmers when 80% of the new generation doesn't want to be a farmer? So their question with my technology, they were, I told them about, it goes faster, uses less water, blah, 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 blah. They could care less. They said, would it make kids want to become a farmer? And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. It's got Arduinos and Raspberry Pis. It's got a game interface. Yeah, I guess it would. And they said, that's the biggest value of what you're doing.
Sure.
And I was really surprised by that. But it really has made a big impact in the way I think about it.
Caleb, where can people go to find out more about what you're doing? You have a website you could tell us?
Yeah. So openag.mit.edu will be up over the next few weeks. In the interim, we still have mitcityfarm.media.mit.edu. If you just Google MIT City Farm, a lot of stuff will come up, which is cool. And just keep following. Oh, and then follow us on Twitter, MIT City Farm, or at Caleb Grows Food, on Instagram at Caleb Grows Food. I mean, we're really trying to push content out. And I have to be fair and say, I'm the open source guy that hasn't put a lot of stuff out there. And that's because, and that's totally fair. And it's it's actually really hard to put things out open source. Protecting something, it's a idiosyncratic, or it's counterintuitive to say that protecting something to be open source is difficult, but it is. Open source does not mean throwing things out into the public domain, because if it meant that, every one of the I guess I should use a nicer word, but the people that are following what I'm doing,
ambulance chasers,
that would like to protect it against me.
Sure they would.
So if I put this, let's say the personal food computer online right now, and I showed everybody what it is, A company could then file a patent, a provisional patent on that, and protect me from using it.
Correct.
If I haven't already filed intellectual property protection of my own.
Yeah.
And then what you have to do is...
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's crazy, but it's true. And so what I have to do is twice the work of anybody that's protecting something. So there's no, we're just going to put it out there, kind of open source. No, open source is strategic, and it's twice as hard, because I first protect it, and then I have to create a license agreement, right? So, for example, to get access to the software we've developed over the next 2 weeks for this food computer, it will be under a license called GPL2. This is what I've had to learn as an architect, and this general public license was actually developed at MIT by a guy named Richard Stallman, and that's what started the open source software revolution. So you will see that we have licensed it, but we've licensed it to remain open source. So somebody can't take it, protect us against it, and then build a product on it. So you'll see the software come out GPL2. You'll see the hardware specifications come out with a Creative Commons protection, and you'll see a terms of service and user agreement come out for the data. So just like when you sign on to Apple and you click yes all the time and you never know what you're signing yes to, or just like Howard Shapiro's Open Genome for Peanuts, where you have to acknowledge that this thing stays open before you get to it, we'll have the same thing. And it's taken me quite a lot of lawyers and quite a lot of crazy time to figure that out. And so to the critics that say, hey, that open source guy has not put anything open source, just wait, it's coming. Just wait, it's coming, and it's done with some of the best lawyers in the country.
Outstanding.
We've been speaking with Caleb Harper from the MIT Media Lab. Caleb, thank you so much. This was terrific. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great.
Man, I always appreciate the time to talk to Dickson, and Vincent, it was a pleasure.
Good luck.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
You can find Urban Agriculture at iTunes and also at openag.ws. And if you have any questions or comments about anything that we talk about here on Urban Agriculture, please send them to urbanag at openag.ws. Dickson Despommier is at verticalfarm.com. Dickson, that was a cool interview, wasn't it?
I enjoyed it.
Thank you for suggesting him, and thank you for your participation.
You're welcome, Vincent.
On this fine end of summer day. The music you hear on Urban Agriculture is performed by John Harrison with the Wichita State University Chamber Players, and also by Ronald Jenkins. You can find his work at ronaldjenkins.com. You've been listening to Urban Agriculture. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
See you upstairs at the Vertical Farm.